Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC Winter Split Finals overview and analysis video. We are finally here, the end of the Winter Split. It's a lot earlier than it is for a lot of the other regions, but we're 1/3 of the way done with the regular season, technically like the process here in the LEC, and by the end of this video, we will know our first team to officially qualify for MSI. Yes, we are already there. In terms of the LEC, of course, winning the Winter Split means you are at the very least one of the two teams to go to MSI representing Europe. And that's pretty big. Obviously, you want to get to those international tournaments. And, you know, with all of these regions having 2 reps now, or at least the big regions having 2 reps now, qualifying early is a really important process for them. So a pretty big series here, and it's between 2 teams that obviously I'm very excited to talk about. If you haven't seen my coverage on the playoffs up until this point, I'm going to link the LEC playlist up in the iCard right now. That's going to be every single regular season week. That's going to be every single playoff series. We've covered it all on this channel. And so we've done a comprehensive overview of everything. This is what it's been leading up to. Of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of this series, whether you enjoyed it, whether you didn't enjoy it. Was the result what you were expecting, or were you a bit surprised by what ended up happening, how things ended up going down? Would just love to hear your thoughts about, you know, everything going on with the LEC. Do you think this is repeatable, or do you think that, you know, these 2 teams are going to be in different positions by the end of spring or by the end of summer? Just everything going on in the LEC I'd love to hear about down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go game by game in the finals, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game in the series. At the end of the series, I will be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. And of course, at the end of this video, we will celebrate the team that has qualified for the MSI, for the Midseason Invitational. So a lot of good stuff coming on, but let's go ahead and get right into the preview and the analysis. And of course, it is a finals matchup between G2 Esports and Mad Lions Koi, taking very different routes to get here. G2 looking like the best team for basically the entirety of the year. They stumbled a couple of times in the regular season just because it's G2 and you're never going to have a perfect regular season out of this organization, but I never took them out of #1 in my power rankings at any point. They found themselves lucky enough to get that #1 seed in the playoffs, and they only lost 1 game in the first half of the playoffs, the best of 3 stage against Fnatic. They were able to sweep BDS at their full power with Adam to get to this spot in the finals, and I think a lot of people have just been considering them the clear-cut favorites, me included, for basically the entire split. I think it would be a pretty major upset if anybody other than G2 ended up lifting the trophy, and that's really the expectations that they're going into this with. They are the best team in Europe, and they're the best org in Europe. They have the most consistency. All 5 members are returning from last year, and they play really well together. There have been good things and there have been bad things. Yike is playing amazing. Caps was the MVP of the league for me in the Winter Split, but there are some concerns as well. While Hans and Mickey have been getting better over the course of the playoffs, and that's absolutely the case. Basically, every best of 3 and best of 5 has been better than the best of 1s in the regular season. There was 9 best of 1s where Hans and Mickey weren't particularly good for this G2 team, and Broken Blade has really not found any sort of consistency at all in the top lane. He's been a relatively good laner, but he's had a lot of trouble translating that into any sort of power section of the map. They really haven't been able to play through top lane in the same way that they were able to do that last year and the year before, and so it's certainly something to keep in mind. But with the single best jungle mid duo, basically no question, in the league right now, it's really hard to view them as anything other than major favorites in this series, and that's including the fact that Mad Lions is white hot at the current moment. Nobody, me included, nobody thought that they were going to be in this. Funnily enough, this is a matchup between my #1 team in my preseason power rankings and my #10 team in my preseason power rankings. Definitely interesting with how that ended up, but Mad has really been on a tear ever since losing to Fnatic in their first best of 3. They have yet to lose. They took down Giant X. They were able to take down Fnatic. They were able to take down BDS in the semifinals to get here, and all of those series looked very good from them. Of course, they weren't the easiest series in the entire world. It's not like they rolled over these teams, but there are so many positives to talk about for Mad, and a lot of players are really stepping up. Basically, everybody's been playing at a pretty high level. Elyoya is obviously the player you want to point to as the veteran on this team that you're relying a lot on, and he has been terrific, but it's been the rookies that have stepped up, specifically the solo laners of Merwin and Fresco, that have been great for this team. They've been super good, and Supa has been good as well. Supa and Alvaro were the best bot lane in the regular season, in my opinion, and then they haven't been quite as dominant in the playoffs. I think they're actually the lane that has taken the biggest step back when it comes to the best of series, but they've certainly certainly still been good. Supa in particular has still been very good. It's just really been like top lane kind of dominating with these weird, crazy counter picks, and, you know, Frescoe just kind of being really good, like actually stepping up and being one of the best mid laners in the league in this stretch. And that's very important for Mad. If they want to have really a chance at all in this series, they're going to have to rely on these young players to be able to go up against these incredibly experienced players on the side of G2, their counterparts. You need someone like Frescoe to be able to keep up with Caps. You need someone like Merwin to be able to keep up with Broken Blade. You need Supa and Alvaro to be able to keep up with Hans and Mickey. This is not going to be an easy challenge for Mad Lions, and they're underdogs for a reason in this. I picked G2 3-0. That was my prediction, but like I said in my previous video, or at the end of, you know, the semifinals video, if Mad was able to take a game or two in this series, I'm really not going to be all that surprised. Really, when it gets shocking to me is when they take the entire series. That, I think, would be very much out of the realm of what I would expect, but, you know, they're a team that is built for upsets in and how they play. They're very clinical in execution. You give them an inch and they will take a mile. I just think G2 is a little bit more mechanically superior, and that's why they are pretty heavy favorites going into this series for a reason. But is that going to stick, or is Mad going to be able to cause a pretty big upset and qualify themselves for MSI with 4 rookies? Well, we're going to find out in this series, and we got to start with game number 1. So, the winner of game number 1 was Mad Lions. They are going to take the first game of this series, and you don't want to call it an upset, but yeah, Mad's up 1-0 in this series against G2 in the finals. This was not the start that I think anybody was anticipating. Like I said, it wasn't just me that believed that G2 were heavy favorites for this series. Basically, everybody was saying that G2, it's 3-0. You know, it's 3-0, it's 3-1 at the absolute worst, and Mad comes out and just outplays them in the first game. A lot of cohesion, really great side laning coming in from Mad, and just general, like, great team fighting, great execution on the good states that they were able to put themselves in, led to this victory, and that is massive for them. For G2, obviously, you don't want to lose game number 1, but man, you kind of got draft gapped, didn't you? You blind pick TF, you're not really able to do anything with that. You take a Kali into the top lane, Merwin ends up countering with the Yasuo, the Zac ends up becoming a major problem, and you don't really have any way to peel him. This is not a particularly good draft for G2, and they were exploited for it. Basically, all of the problems that you could expect G2 to have in this, they ended up falling to, and even with some good plays coming in from some of their players, it wasn't enough to be able to push them back over the top. So let's talk about it. Player of the game for me in game 1 is going to go to Elyoya in the jungle on this Zac. We've basically exclusively seen this champion in the top lane ever since he's returned to pro play. But at his heart, Zac is a jungler that can appear out of anywhere and really cause your lane to just get destroyed instantly, and that's what he was doing. A phenomenal game for Elyoya. His macro sense is really impressive, and there's a reason that I was calling him the best jungler in Europe at the beginning of the year. I really think the only person that's in that conversation with him is Yike. It's one of those two. They're the two best junglers in Europe, so to see Elyoya come out in game number 1, outpace Yike on the Vi, which is a pretty good champion for him and for his playstyle, on something like Zac that isn't necessarily going to do that super easily, it's just very impressive. He was phenomenal in this game, consistently creating opportunities for, you know, specifically his top lane and his mid laner, and it's really, really good. I mean, Elyoya is a really fun player to watch, but yeah, a lot of the credit for this one is going to go to Merwin in the top lane on the Yasuo, because he picked Yasuo R5 in the top lane in the finals, and he won on it. He dominated lane, was up a ridiculous amount of CS by the time we moved in to like the 15-minute team fight stage where everybody just started grouping, and then he was super influential in side lanes as well. You really wouldn't expect Yasuo to be that big of a problem going into things like a Kali or Twisted Fate, but man, he was an issue in this game to try and deal with. Big credit to Merwin. He has really broken out on this playoff run for Mad, and this was another example of that. Frescoe continues to look awesome. He was going into Caps this game, and yeah, Caps blinded TF, and Frescoe was able to answer with the Ori, which is a very good matchup, and he played it very well. Caps still made some very good plays in side lanes, was able to open up opportunities for G2, but you got to give a lot of credit to Frescoe. He has faced some of the hardest competition in the mid lane, basically the entirety of this playoff run. He went from Humanoid to Nuke to now Caps, and he's kind of passed every single test along the way. For a player that was supposedly supposed to be the weak link of Mad, he's maybe been their best player over the past month, and that's crazy to say. And Supa and Alvaro looked great. Alvaro really had a great performance on the rel. Mickey could not keep up with a lot of the creation that he was doing in the mid game. And maybe you want to give a lot of that credit to, you know, Zac plus Orianna, which is very difficult to deal with, even Merwin in the top lane creating advantages. But I think Alvaro capitalized and you know, followed up on a lot of those things in a very good way. I think Supa needs to be a bit more careful as this series goes along. He's been a little bit aggressive in terms of his positioning, but for the most part in this game, it actually ended up working out. I think Mad was very, very clinical, very good. They knew their comp, they knew how to execute on it, and they were just better in this game. That's quite frankly all that there is to say about it. And then for G2 on the other side, Mad was better in this game, and that's got to be at the very least a bit concerning because you were such heavy favorites going into the series. Now you can blame it a little bit on draft gap because again, there just really aren't a lot of options once you get behind in this comp. Blinding TF is something that I never really would recommend someone do, and then blinding Akali in the top lane is also a major question mark for me. I just don't think either ended up working out. Broken Blade's gonna get my dud of the game. He played really bad in this game on the Akali, got destroyed in the laning phase and was entirely useless in the back half of the game. If you're gonna bring a pick like that into the top lane, you have to be able to execute on it. We've seen what Merwin can do on it, and obviously maybe there was like a potential flex here with the Twisted Fate going top lane. We know that a bunch of people have been playing TF top, including Merwin on the other side of this, but Akali just was useless this game, and Broken Blade was a big part of that. He has not been very good over the course of this split, at least living up to his expectations. He's been fine, but Merwin honestly has been better, especially in the recent weeks, and that was the case here in Game 1. Yike got out-jungled for what was the first time in quite a long time. Elyoya is really good. Sometimes you lose pressure to a very good jungler playing Zac, and you just can't really do anything about it. Still was able to stay active on the map, and I want to give a lot of credit to Caps. The champion he was playing was entirely useless this game, but he still made a lot of really good plays on him. Caps is just really good. He's the best player in the LEC, and he's reasserted that, but it wasn't enough. Mickey died 8 times this game, and a lot of them were worth it, but a lot of them weren't, right? Like, some of these were really bad. Hans was kind of useless on the Senna. They just got outscaled very quickly. They were in a position where they never really were going to be able to retain control of the game, and it was very, very clear, in my opinion, from basically moment 15 onwards. And so for MDK, this is a massive win, but for G2, you got to win game number 2. You got to be able to tie this series up at 1 apiece. You don't want to fall down 0-2. Even though you are G2, a lot of teams I would be like, it's doomed. You're not going to win 3 games in a row against a team that has that much momentum on you, but G2 can win 3 games in a row against almost anybody in the world, specifically anybody in the LEC, and I'm not going to freak out about it, but I do think this is a very important game for them to win, and for Mad, if you can establish a 2-0 lead in the finals against G2, that is enormous for your confidence, and this is a team that is white hot. If they can keep that momentum rolling, this could be a major finals upset, but Game 2 is really going to tell us a lot. So who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 2 was G2 Esports. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to tie up the series here at 1 apiece, and this is much more of the G2 that we were expecting. Now, it is a dominant performance, and they came out and they were the better team, but I still want to see a little bit more of a clinical play from a couple of these players. I don't know why I said a clinical play. That's not how English works, but I want to see them play a lot better right now. This still feels like not the best version of G2 that we've seen throughout this year, and that's concerning because it is the finals, and I think you really want to see them step up, but obviously this game was still very, very good. I just think they relied a lot on their champions being really good. I do want to shout out a couple of the players for being great, but for Mad, some uncharacteristic mistakes coming in. I really do think they just kind of played bad in this game, and it's really not something we've seen them do for quite a while. Credit to Frescoey, I think that he was himself fine. I think generally he was the one who played well, but all 4 other members on this team, I think, had pretty significant mistakes throughout this game that ended up costing Mad pretty heavily in the end. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game for me is going to go to Broken Blade, significantly less for his play, but rather for his champion, because golly, Cassante is good. Like, every single time I watch this champ in pro play, it just feels like it is so low effort to get so much done. And it's no flame to Broken Blade. He did exactly what he was supposed to do in this game, and he dominated. He was player of the game, and this is one of his better performances in quite a while. This is somebody who I have been criticizing over the course of this year for not being consistent enough, not putting out carry-oriented, teamfight status kind of damage numbers, and that's what he did in this game. He was amazing. He was setting up the rest of his team for a lot of different circumstances, but doing it on Cassante just somehow feels significantly less cool. We've seen so many people just dominate on this champion, and man, watching game number 2 felt like, well, here's an example of why Cassante was a bad idea. I'm not going to complain too much about it, but remember how everyone felt about Zeri last year, where they were just complaining and complaining over and over again about that champion being broken, and it's never fun to watch pro play because it's just who plays the Zeri better, yada yada. At least Zeri took skill. I'll just say that. At least you had to kind of position on Zeri. Cassante is just crazy. This guy's kit is just crazy, but Broken Blade still played it well. Hans was really good this game. I think that's really the big kind of standout thing for me is Hansama and Mickey X were really, really good. We'll get to Supa and Alvaro, but a lot of mistakes made by their side. You know, we talked about Hans not exactly playing Senna at a super high level. I think something like Varus is a little bit better for him. We've seen 2 games now of Varus Senna, and the Varus just kind of taking advantage of a lot of the weird trading patterns that the Senna player has, and Hans definitely did that here. He was very good in this game. In fact, I almost wanted to give him player of the game. I just couldn't because Broken Blade was the most important player in this game. I just think Hans played a little bit better. It's really nice to see him stepping up when it matters the most. I mean, we talked about it. His regular season wasn't great. His Worlds wasn't great last year, and so it really felt like there were real concerns with this bot lane going into the back half of this year, but he's been awesome in the best of 3 and the best of 5 stage. Mickey looked really good in this game on Renata. Yike looked a lot better on the Maokai, and Caps was solid on the LeBlanc. Everybody was good, but I think it was Broken Blade and Hansama in my opinion that really were kind of, you know, really dominating this game for G2 and kind of pushed them over the top. And for those to be the 2 players that are winning you a game in the finals, that's pretty big considering that Yike and Caps carried them for so much of the regular season. And then for Matt on the other side, like I said, it was everybody's fault, but I'm going to give dud of the game to Supa. Talked about the really weird trading patterns. His laning was really bad in this game. It's not typically this bad, and he does play Senna well. We've seen him perform well on this champion in the past, but man, this game was not good. Like, there really is no other way to put it. He did not play well in this game. He didn't even come close to playing well in this game. He led the team in kills, and a lot of that was kind of for nothing, right? I think Supa simply has to be better. Him and Alvaro have been a bit more inconsistent as we've gotten into some more important games, and that just can't be the case. Like, that can't be how you end up, you know, moving along in this season. You have to be better in these games that matter a lot more, because these, you know, the rest of this team has really performed. Fresco E in particular has really stepped up, and like I said, he was certainly far from the problem in this game, but 0-7 Zach this time for Elyoya. Certainly not the game 1 performance he had. Merwin was heavily outclassed in terms of the team fight relevance by Broken Blade on the other side of this matchup, and so, you know, just generally, Mad Lions wasn't nearly as good in this game as G2 was, but you know, it's only tied up 1-1. I don't want to freak out. I don't want to sit here and say that this is unwinnable. You just need Supa and Alvaro to be better. That really is what you're going to say. Elyoya needs to be able to get early prio, put Merwin on something he can be more aggressive on. He played a standard tank into tank matchup here, kind of tank, pseudo tank into pseudo tank matchup here, and just kind of got clobbered on it. Was never really relevant on the Gnar. Get back into those crazy counter picks. Get back on, you know, you were on red side here, stay on red side. Give Merwin that counter pick on R5 and try to play that out, because we know he does really well in those circumstances. Outside of that, like I said, try to get pressure for Elyoya early. If that means drafting a mid laner that can move around and try to play with him, then I think that's pretty important, but Supa and Alvaro simply have to be better isolated in the early 2v2. I know that that's the strength of Hans and Mickey, but it was so bad in this game that I kind of lost it for them, but it's just tied up at 1 apiece. If you can win game number 3, all of a sudden you're 1 game away from being the LEC champions. That's a pretty nice place to be, but the same thing applies to G2. This is a make or break game for both of these teams. Who's going to make it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was G2 Esports. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to go up for the first time in this series 2-1, and they are officially 1 game away from becoming your LEC Winter Split champions for the 2nd year in a row. Mad Lions just could not get the job done here in the 3rd game. They go down after losing 2 in a row here, and, you know, we were talking about how we wanted to see G2 kind of really play their game and dominate in the way that we've seen G2 be able to dominate in this series, and if this game wasn't that, then I don't know what was. This was a domination. There were moments where it felt like, I don't know, maybe Mad could, you know, play off the back of Elyoya having a bit of gold on the Belvath, but outside of that, it was doomed. I mean, G2 was better in every fight. Every single one of their players was gapping the other in terms of their laning phase. It was just all G2 all the time. An incredibly impressive performance. Really only the best team in the league is going to be able to dominate like this in the finals. This was incredibly fun to watch. All 5 members playing well. Well, I'll say 4.5 members playing well. We got half a good game out of Mickey X. The beginning, not so much, but he ended up picking it up on the Nautilus down the stretch, but everybody else here was phenomenal for G2. Player of the game is honestly really difficult because everybody really had their moment to shine, but obviously the player who shined the most consistently was Yike on the Viego. Man, was he taking over a lot of these fights. Yike is just a beast. He's just so good at everything he does. He really doesn't have a weakness in his game, and I think that's why I'm so much higher on him than other analysts are, and obviously I don't think I am anymore. I think everybody has kind of awoken to how good Yike is over the course of this split, but it was why I was so high on him going into the year, and I was honestly so surprised that I got a bunch of pushback in my like off-season grades and analysis videos when I put Yike, you know, on the same tier as players like Yankos and Elyoya and, you know, above players like Razork. I was shocked that I was getting that kind of pushback on it because Yike was really good last year too, but he's just a very versatile player who can do a bit of everything. He can play engagers, he can play, tanky, more supportive style picks. We saw the Maokai in game number 2 look really good, and he can also play Viego and completely pop off. He's just very, very good at basically every part of League of Legends. His early game pathing is phenomenal, and he is the best team fighting jungler in the LEC. I don't even think that's up for debate, no matter what you think of Yike. That's his strength as a player, whether that's as an engaged tank or as somebody who can carry and get resets and take over like the Viego here in this one. He was awesome, and he's really fun to watch. Both top and bot lane also played really well. Hansam has very quietly been genuinely phenomenal in this series, and I know he's not going to get the same kind of recognition that top lane is because Broken Blade is winning in a lot more of a flashy way. He's just completely zoning Merwin out of even trying to play the game in early laning phases, and Broken Blade's awesome. I'm certainly not trying to take anything away from him, but I think Hans has honestly been amazing in this series, and it doesn't really feel like anybody's talking about that. His positioning has been perfect. I mean, truly, his problem has always been that his team fighting is not superb. Like, he's a good team fighter, but he was always a great laner, good team fighter, and it would cost him when they would go up against the best teams in the world at international events. Not just G2, but basically every team that he's played for. And so when you get into, a situation where Hans is really being relied upon in some of these late game fights, not entirely, because again, you've got a strong Kennen, a strong Viego, the Azir was very relevant, but Hans was awesome in these team fights, consistently dodging skill shots coming in from the other side, always just in range to be able to output just as much damage as he needs to. And his laning phase was terrific. I mean, Mickey X tried to run it down a bit at the beginning of this game, and Hans kind of saved him and really kept him in a decent spot. So credit to Hans. Broken Blade was also great. He is dominating 1v1 against Merwin. The laning phase is just not particularly close. Top lane can really spiral out of control when you're in losing matchups and losing them hard, and that's exactly what's happening right now to Mad Lions. I told them that they probably should have picked red side, and they probably should have picked red side. I really think counterpick in top lane is mega important right now for Merwin because he's just not winning these matchups where he's not getting good lane situations, and that was very clear here. Broken Blade was awesome. And Caps was underratedly great here. I know his scoreline doesn't necessarily live up to the 6-1-16 or the 9-1-17 or the 10-1-15 of his teammates, but he was incredibly influential in ending this game. The Shuriman shuffles he was able to put out were awesome. Again, Mickey was fine down the stretch, but that beginning of the game was really rough from him. Tried his best to throw it, but at the end, G2 is just awesome. This is the dominating G2 that I think we all wanted to see in the finals. But for Mad, being down 1-2 now is certainly not the position you want to be in, and I think you have the least amount of momentum right now that you've had basically at any point in this playoff run. Maybe after you lost 2 games in a row against BDS, that could be considered the low point, but you got destroyed in this game. I mean, this was not particularly close. Dead of the game is going to go to Supa in the bot lane once again, this time significantly less of his fault. He really wasn't all that bad in this game, but man, did he get picked on the Senna. He really was never able to actually play the game, never able to team fight, never able to lane. So many resources going into killing him at every given opportunity. I actually think he played better here in game 3 than he did in game 2, but his output on the game was significantly worse because he just didn't really get to do anything in this one. Again, Elyoya did have gold, and he was relatively strong. I think he was 5-0 at one point in this game, but he ends up at 5-5 because what is Bel'Veth going to do into a super fed Viego, a Kennen, a Nautilus, so many tools to just make Bel'Veth really kind of useless. This was not a good pick in this circumstance. I get it that Elyoya wanted to carry the game, and they did go to my suggestion of putting Frescoe on something that can move around the map and really help his jungle game prio in the early game, and while it did kind of work, they just weren't able to team fight. They gave a lot of gold over to G2 in the process of getting that Bel'Veth ahead, and that was a bit of a problem. Like I said, Merwin has been getting gapped in this series pretty hard. The laning phases have just been brutal for him. He was not able to play this game at all, just like he was not able to play game number 2 at all. I really do think they need to give him counterpick, and they need to go back to these wacky picks that Broken Blade might not have as much comfort leaning into, because I don't think in the isolated matchups that Broken Blade is good at, I just don't think he's losing. That's kind of what he has shown so far in this series. Alvaro wasn't able to do anything on the rel. There really isn't a lot of positives I can give Mad Lions from this game. The one thing I can say is that you're not out yet. You've been down, in this playoff run before, and you're already the underdog. You really don't have a lot to lose here, so going out in game number 4 with basically nothing but a chip on your shoulder is a pretty easy way to hopefully make things interesting. And for G2, obviously, you have the opportunity to close out this series here in 4 games, which you would like to do, but you don't want to take this team for granted. Mad Lions has upset a lot of people on their run here in the playoffs, and G2 does not want to be this does not want to be a series that they take to 5 games. I think that's pretty clear. So, is that going to happen? Are we going to go to a Silver Scrapes game number 5, or is G2 going to be able to close it out in 4? Well, the winner of game number 4 was G2 Esports, they are going to take game number 4. They are going to win this series 3-1, and they are officially your 2024 LEC Winter Split champions. This is the second year in a row that G2 has won the Winter Split, the first split of the year. And just like last year, they've done it in incredibly dominant fashion. For the second year in a row, it really does feel like this is the best team in the LEC with basically no competition. Mad Lions put up some effort in this game. It certainly wasn't a complete blowout, and for those of you who got to see it live the whole way through, you got to see a really fun back and forth with, Mad Lions really trying to play through their incredibly fed Varus in the bot lane, and G2 just being able to shut it down with all their options. For the rest of you who were like me and didn't get to see this game until after and had to rewatch it, obviously that sucks. Like, I know there's been a lot of layoffs at the LEC recently, and I'm not going to criticize their broadcast or their production because I know that they're incredibly understaffed, but it's certainly a very unfortunate time for such a major issue to happen. At least they got it back before the game ended, but G2 was able to get the job done, even when Mad looked like they were in relative control. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game and player of the series for me, maybe shockingly, is going to go to Yike in the jungle. I think Broadcast gave player of the series, I know Broadcast gave player of the series to Broken Blade, and I understand that. The lane gaps this series in the top lane were massive. Merwin, when he doesn't get counterpick, is a significantly weaker player, as I think we found out in this series, but to me, it was Yike who really was the focal point and really the driving force for G2's offense the entirety of this series, and that's why he's going to get my player of the series. I've been a big fan of Yike for a while, basically even back to the LDLC days. I was really liking his tape, and I believed in him going into the rookie year last year. He exceeded my expectations after Winter, especially once he really started to expand kind of his play styles. He was no longer just a carry player. He had learned to play engagers really quickly in the jungle, and this year he's just been phenomenal. The best jungler in the LEC, and I don't even think that's up for debate anymore. He really is a fantastic player, and especially on carries, the Lily has always been a pocket pick of his, and he crushed it here. I mean, 10, 2, and 10. Go watch some of those late game fights. He is perfect on this champion. It truly is amazing to watch. I do want to give a lot of credit to Broken Blade, who was amazing in this series, and to his credit, does deserve Finals MVP. I think Yike deserves it a bit more, but Broken Blade was awesome. This was the best series he played all year up until this point, which is a great time to have your best series in the finals. I don't think anybody is going to really complain about that, but man, it was a top gap. We'll get to Merwin on the other side, but a lot of things I think were figured out about him, and I was generally very surprised that Mad Lions kept selecting blue side over and over in this series. I get they wanted to prioritize the Varus, but Merwin got destroyed on the top side because of it, in my opinion, so. Then you have Caps, basically playing an engager in the mid lane in Azir. It's very weird to talk about it, but, anybody who follows the channel knows I talk about LEC Azir syndrome all the time. LEC mid laners don't play Azir as a backline damage carry. They play him as an engage mage, and that's what Caps was doing in this series. He was the primary form of initiation in every single fight here with the Shuriman Shuffle, and that's great if you can pull it off. The reason I call it LEC Azir syndrome is because a lot of times you don't necessarily need to do that. In this series, he did, though, because Mickey X was by far the worst player on G2 across the entirety of this series. It's not even just scoreline, like 10 and 11. That looks awful, but it wasn't really as bad as that. But even so, he still made a lot of mistakes across this series, and I think Caps was really the one that was kind of cleaning up for a lot of those mistakes. And Hans, I think, underratedly was genuinely phenomenal across this series. He's gotten basically no praise across the internet from what I've seen, across social media for how good he played. I think he was awesome in this series. Everything you could have wanted out of a top tier AD carry and then some. ADC in the league is a very weak role in terms of depth right now, and Hans may have done enough in this finals performance to really say yeah, I'm still the #1 ADC in the region, even if he didn't necessarily play like that throughout the regular season at all. So credit to G2. Everybody really showed up and did their job in this series, and that's really all you can ask for. Yike and Broken Blade in particular were stars, and I think Hans Sama deserves to be in that conversation as well. Not like Caps was not creating a lot of big plays for this team too. Basically everybody on G2 earned this championship. And then for Mad, obviously it sucks going down 3-1 after winning game number 1, losing 3 games in a row to G2. It's unfortunate, but how awesome is it that they made it here in the first place? Let's keep that in mind. This is not a devastating loss. You maybe wish they would have played a bit better. Shout out to Supa. He really did not play well in games 2 and 3, and he did not want to be the problem in game number 4. He was the really only player on Mad Lions that was trying to keep up with G2 in this game, and, he tried. He really, really tried. They just didn't have enough firepower. Alvaro and Elyoya, I think, also had decent games, but it came time for the two players that kind of got them here in the first place in terms of the playoff run to really fall back down to earth, if you will. Fresco, he had the worst game of the series that he had, in my opinion. Both the Talia games in games 3 and 4 were his worst games that he's played in quite a while. Certainly something to keep in mind. And then Merwin just got destroyed here. He's going to get dead of the game. I mean, he couldn't play. Like, he was literally sitting under his tower waiting for the wave to crash into him, and there was just nothing he could ever do. He was getting dove by Yike. Caps was literally catching the waves against him. Like, it was doomed. Like, there was nothing he could do. He was out of this game entirely, and sometimes that happens, but like, it happened to him 3 games in a row, which has definitely got to be at least a little bit frustrating for a player that I think a lot of people were very excited about. Again, I've been kind of pumping the brakes, not a lot, because I was really in on the playoff run, but I had talked about the inconsistencies. I think even I underestimated just how important it was that he got good matchups in the top lane, and when he didn't get to pick those matchups, he really, really struggled. That might be an area that teams try to take advantage of with Mad Lions going into the future. I don't think it's something that teams worse than G2 are going to be able to capitalize on nearly as much. There were times where he blind picked in the series against BDS and Fnatic, and he still did really well in those series, but I think consistently at a top level when you're playing the best teams in the LEC, when you're talking about a guy who wants to be like a top 3 top laner in the region, you know, you got to be able to at least survive in these matchups, at least be relevant, even if you're super behind in gold, and he just never was. He was the weakest player in this series by a pretty large margin. So for Mad, again, I don't want to dwell on the negatives because it is such a positive that they were here in the first place that it's really hard to say anything negative about this run. They were awesome across all of the winter split. They were number 10 in basically everybody's power rankings, F tier in the LEC ones at the beginning of the year, so you really can't be mad at them for going into the finals and winning a game against G2, but hopefully this is a building block for them. I mean, they showed a lot of great things over the course of this split, but there's the potential for this team to get even better as the year continues to go along. Right now, they very much do feel like one of the best teams in the LEC, and I really do hope this is not the last time we see them in the finals this year in 2024, but congratulations to G2. They are your 2024 Winter Split champions. They have qualified for MSI, which is obviously very big. You know, not that it was ever going to be a huge shock that they qualify for MSI, but, you know, they're at the very least going to be one of the 2 LEC teams going to MSI. They've qualified for the season finals. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is if they take the rest of the year to kind of, you know, practice some stuff like they did last year. You know, Spring Split was a little bit more of a trial year for G2, or a trial split for G2, because they had already qualified for MSI. There really wasn't any reason to try in Spring Split for them because they've already qualified for everything they need to, so going to be interesting to see if they do something similar with some crazy picks, but for now, it is very clear and very apparent that this is the best team in Europe, and I doubt there's really going to be a lot that changes that over the course of the next few months. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC 2024 Winter Split Finals overview and analysis video, and that's going to do it for the Winter Split. We are done with the first third of the regular season here in the LEC. G2 are your Winter Split champions again for the second year in a row. They've qualified for MSI. They've qualified for the season finals. Congratulations to them. I'm really interested to see what happens with the LEC moving forward, but we're going to skip another week on the LEC. No video, obviously, this Wednesday because there's no games. Next Wednesday, we're going to have the LEC Spring Primer coming out to get you ready for Spring Split, and then obviously we jump back into Spring coverage in a couple of weeks here. I'm very excited for that, but let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of the LEC Split, what you thought of G2 winning it, what you thought of Mad Lions making it this far, and what you think might change going into the Spring Split. There are some roster changes that I'm excited to get into when we do that Primer video, so let me know your thoughts on them down in the comment section below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LEC, and now that there's a little bit of a break, it's good to hit that subscribe button to catch up on some of the other regions. We cover all 4 of the major regions: LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week on this channel that they play games at the very least. And we also cover the NACL Tier 2 over in North America every single week. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the channel for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.